This series has looked at what 15 years of Republican control cost Oklahoma families. Schools were told to do more with less. Mothers and babies were told to wait. Rural hospitals were told to hang on. Working families were told prosperity was just around the corner. But while incomes lagged, life expectancy fell behind, and public systems weakened, Oklahoma still had the money to make different choices. The question is not whether Oklahoma had the money. The question is why Oklahoma families were not the priority. Republicans sold Oklahomans an economic model based on tax cuts, low costs, and subsidies. If that model worked for ordinary families, the results would show up in the numbers. They do not. Median household income growth in Oklahoma from 2018 to 2023 was only 3.2%, compared with 6.4% nationally. Oklahoma's life expectancy remains well below the national average, and the share of adults with a bachelor's degree is only 28.3%, around 44th in the country. If the model worked, families would be showing it. The clearest way to understand what happened is to follow the money that does not show up in the ordinary budget debate. Oklahoma built what is essentially a shadow budget, a growing collection of tax credits, rebates, reduced rates, exemptions, set-asides, and incentive programs. That system grew from roughly $180 million to about $1.5 billion after Republicans took control. That is nearly 12 cents of every dollar in the last appropriated budget. Families were told there was never enough money. The shadow budget tells a different story. Education is one of the clearest examples of what was crowded out. Inflation-adjusted state aid per student was down nearly 27% in 2017 and about 28% by the 2018 walkout, the deepest cuts in the country. Direct-to-college enrollment fell from 51.4% in 2012 to 34.8% in 2022. Only 28.3% of Oklahoma adults hold a bachelor's degree, ranking around 44th nationally. And the state has relied on thousands of emergency certified teachers. Oklahoma says it wants a better economy, but it has underinvested in the classrooms that produce it. The private school tax credit shows the problem in its simplest form. The cap for the 2026 to 2027 school year is now $275 million. More than 90% of recipients were already using private schools, and about 85% of the money was concentrated in the Oklahoma City and Tulsa areas. About 26% of applicants reported adjusted gross income above $250,000. This program did not broadly expand educational choice. It largely subsidized choices families were already making while public schools serving nearly every Oklahoma child were told to wait. The low-wage model did not produce broad prosperity either. Oklahoma's median household income growth from 2018 to 2023 was only 3.2%, compared with 6.4% nationally. The state minimum wage remains $7.25 an hour. For a family of four, the poverty level wage is around $15.87 an hour. The cutoffs for public assistance are not far below what many working Oklahomans earn. Too many families are still one car repair, one medical bill, or one rent increase away from trouble. That is not prosperity. That is a fragile economy. Health is where policy failure becomes impossible to hide. Life expectancy in Oklahoma is about 73.8 years, well below the national figure of 77.5. Infant mortality is 7.1 per 1,000 births, about 341 infant deaths in 2023. Maternal mortality remains far too high, and Sooner Care paid for nearly 60% of Oklahoma births. When a state says it values life and families, these are the numbers that show whether it means it. Oklahoma families needed investment. They got slogans and delay. The Taxpayer Endowment Trust Fund sounds responsible at first glance. Save money, build a fund, and let the returns grow over time. But Oklahoma is not governing in theory. It is governing in a state with underfunded schools, fragile rural hospitals, unaffordable child care, and family incomes that lag the nation. The fiscal year 27 set-aside alone is $200 million. Combined with the private school tax credit cap, that is about $475 million. And under earlier modeling, The fund would not become truly significant until around 2129. That is a long wait for families who need help now. Oil and gas has been central to Oklahoma's economy for generations, and a serious review does not need to deny that. But respecting an industry is not the same thing as granting every tax preference forever. Horizontal drilling is no longer experimental technology. It is the industry standard. So the question is simple. Why has the legislature not fully rescinded the remaining 2% gross production tax incentive for horizontal drilling that the Oklahoma Tax Commission estimated cost the state about $174 million in 2024? That is real money with real opportunity cost. Economic development incentives should face the same standard as any other public spending. The question is not whether a company accepted the money. The question is whether the jobs or investment would not have happened but for the incentive. Quality Jobs is a good example. From 2015 through 2022, the program paid out about $424.4 million. A recent review suggested a fiscal return around 2 to 1, but the same work estimated the but-for effect at only about 47%. That means taxpayers still have every reason to ask how much of this activity might have happened anyway. The Incentive Evaluation Commission has done useful work, but it was not designed to answer the larger question raised by Oklahoma's shadow budget. The IEC reviews only about 8 to 10% of incentives each year, usually on a 2 to 4 year cycle. That means it spot checks programs. It does not provide one full picture of the total cost, public return, opportunity cost, and policy trade-offs across the entire system. If Oklahoma is moving roughly $1.5 billion through the shadow budget, taxpayers should not have to assemble the truth like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. What Oklahoma needs now is one independent, one-time, system-wide review. Not a political ally. Not a consultant already embedded in the same incentive loop. A fresh set of eyes. The review should cover major tax credits, rebates, exemptions, reduced rates, set-asides, quality jobs, commerce programs, private school tax credits, and gross production tax preferences. And the questions should be simple. What does it cost? Who benefits? Is the benefit concentrated? Would the activity have happened anyway? And what public value did taxpayers receive? That is not anti-business. That is pro-taxpayer. The cost of a serious review is tiny compared with the money at stake. The proposed budget is $600,000 to review approximately $1.3 billion in annual tax code spending. That is less than 0.05% of the amount being reviewed. It could be partly funded by redirecting money already used for 1 year of the regular Incentive Evaluation Commission consultant review cycle. And any savings identified should not automatically remain inside the economic development incentive system. The report should identify amounts that could be returned to the General Revenue Fund and compare their public value with investments in education, healthcare, nutrition, infrastructure, childcare, public safety, and workforce development. For years, Oklahoma families were told the state could not afford what they needed. But while schools, hospitals, childcare, wages, nutrition, rural communities, and public safety were asked to wait, the shadow budget kept growing. Tax cuts were protected. Credits were protected. Rebates were protected. Reduced rates were protected. Set-asides were protected. Incentives were protected. What was not protected was the future of ordinary Oklahoma families. That is why Oklahoma now owes taxpayers a full answer. If a program works, prove it. If it partly works, reform it. If it does not work, end it. Prove it, reform it, or end it.